In 1613, an English trading ship called the Clove arrived at the port of Hirado, Japan. Its captain, John Saris, carried letters, goods, and an offer. The offer was for a man named William Adams, an Englishman, a navigator from the town of Gillingham in Kent. Adams had not seen England in 15 years. He had a wife there, Mary, children, including a son and a daughter named Deliverance, who had been small when he left. He had written letters home. He did not know if they had arrived. He had received no reply. Saris told Adams he could board the Clove and sail home. After 15 years, the door was open. Adams said no. This is not a story about a man who was trapped in Japan. It is the story of a man who was trapped, and then, somewhere in those 15 years, stopped being trapped. Somewhere between the shipwreck and the samurai estate, between the wife in England and the wife in Japan, between the man he was and the man he became, William Adams made a choice that he could never unmake. In 2024, FX and Hulu released Shōgun, a television series based on James Clavell's 1975 novel, which was itself inspired by Adams' life. The show won 18 Primetime Emmy Awards, more than any single season of television in history. Hiroyuki Sanada played the Warlord based on Tokugawa Ieyasu. Cosmo Jarvis played the shipwrecked Englishman based on Adams. But the show changed his name to John Blackthorne. It gave him a love story that never happened. It made him more central to Japanese history than he actually was. The real story needs none of that. It is, on its own, one of the most extraordinary lives ever lived by an ordinary man. It begins with 5 ships leaving the Dutch coast in the summer of 1598. William Adams was born on September 24, 1564, in Gillingham, Kent. At 12, he was apprenticed to a shipyard master named Nicholas Diggins at Limehouse on the Thames, where he spent 12 years learning to build and navigate ships. He served in the Royal Navy, working as master of a supply ship during the English campaign against the Spanish Armada in 1588. After that, he became a merchant navigator, sailing trade routes to North Africa. By his early 30s, he was a skilled pilot with a wife, Mary Hinn, and a young daughter. He was competent, experienced, and entirely ordinary. In 1598, a Dutch trading company recruited him as pilot major, chief navigator, for an expedition to the East Indies. The plan was to sail through the Strait of Magellan and across the Pacific to trade for spices. 5 ships, several hundred men. Adams was aboard the Hopa and later transferred to the Da Liefde, a vessel originally named Erasmus after the philosopher. The fleet departed from the port of Hooray on June 27, 1598. What followed was one of the most catastrophic voyages in the history of European navigation. The commander, Jacques Mahieu, died of fever near the Cape Verde Islands before the fleet even crossed the Atlantic. His replacement, Simon de Cordes, took command. The ships reached the Strait of Magellan and spent months trapped there, battered by storms so violent that some crews refused to continue. Men died of scurvy, their gums blackening, their teeth falling out. Others died of dysentery. The cold in the strait was relentless. When they finally emerged into the Pacific, the fleet scattered. One ship was captured by the Spanish off Chile. Another turned back toward the Atlantic. De Cordes himself was killed in a confrontation with indigenous people on the coast of Chile. Da Liefde, with Adams aboard, pushed west across the Pacific alongside the Hopa. But during the crossing, the Hopa was lost in a storm and never seen again. Da Liefde continued alone. The crossing took months. There was no reliable chart for this route. The ship's food supplies rotted. Fresh water ran out and was replaced by what could be collected from rain. Men died one after another in the holds, their bodies committed to the ocean. The ship itself was deteriorating, its hull weakened by nearly 2 years of continuous sailing. The crew that had left Hurei as sailors and traders had become survivors, then patients, then ghosts, crewing a ship that was barely afloat. On April 19, 1600, Da Lifta reached the coast of Kyushu, Japan. Of the 5 ships that had left Hurei, it was the only one to reach its destination. Of the roughly 100 men who had sailed aboard her, approximately 24 were still alive. Of those 24, only a handful could still stand. William Adams was one of them. The ship carried a cargo that would matter enormously in the months ahead. 19 bronze cannons, 5,000 cannonballs, 500 muskets, 300 rounds of chain shot, and large quantities of ammunition. This was supposed to be trade goods and protection for the voyage. Instead, it arrived at the doorstep of a country about to go to war. The Japanese who found them did not know what to make of the half-dead foreigners on the rotting ship. But someone else did. Portuguese Jesuit missionaries, who had been operating in Japan for half a century, immediately sent word to the authorities. These men, the Jesuits said, were pirates, thieves, enemies of the Catholic faith. They should be executed. Adams did not know it yet, but his life now depended on the judgment of a single man. A warlord who was, at that very moment, preparing for the largest battle in Japanese history. Tokugawa Ieyasu was 57 years old and had spent his entire life waiting. He had been a hostage as a child, passed between rival clans. He had fought alongside Oda Nobunaga, the first of Japan's 3 great unifiers, and survived Nobunaga's assassination. He had served under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the second unifier, biding his time for decades. When Hideyoshi died in September 1598, leaving a 5-year-old heir and a council of 5 regents to govern in the boy's name, Ieyasu was the most powerful man on the council. He intended to become the most powerful man in Japan. But first he had to deal with Ishida Mitsunari, a powerful commissioner who was building a coalition against him. Japan was splitting into 2 armies. The Eastern Army, led by Ieyasu. The Western Army, led by Mitsunari. The collision was months away. It was into this moment that William Adams was brought before Ieyasu at Osaka Castle, sometime in May 1600. Adams later described the meeting in his letters. Ieyasu asked where he came from. Adams said England. Ieyasu asked why he had sailed so far. Adams said to trade. Ieyasu asked whether his country made war. Adams said yes, but only against the Spanish and Portuguese, not against the peoples of the East. This last answer changed everything. For decades, the Portuguese had held a near monopoly on European trade with Japan. They operated the lucrative Macau to Nagasaki Silk Route, and they came bundled with Jesuit missionaries who had converted, by some estimates, hundreds of thousands of Japanese to Christianity. Hideyoshi had grown suspicious of this. He had executed 26 Christians in Nagasaki in 1597. The question of foreign religion and foreign influence was already a live threat in Japanese politics. And here was Adams, a Protestant, telling Ieyasu something the Jesuits did not want him to hear, that there were European nations willing to trade without demanding the right to convert, that the Dutch and the English would bring goods without bringing God. Ieyasu did not execute Adams. He imprisoned him briefly, then summoned him again and again. Over several weeks, he questioned Adams about European politics, navigation, shipbuilding, and geography. Adams was not a diplomat or a scholar. He was a navigator. But he was honest, and Ieyasu, a man who had spent a lifetime reading people, recognized it. 5 months later, on October 21, 1600, the Eastern and Western armies met at Sekigahara. An estimated 160,000 soldiers clashed in a battle that may have lasted as few as 2 hours, though accounts vary. The battle turned when Kobayakawa Hideaki, nominally a Western Army commander, attacked Mitsunari's forces. Whether this was a mid-battle betrayal or a prearranged defection is still debated by historians. But the effect was decisive. Ieyasu won. Mitsunari was captured and executed. Sekigahara made Ieyasu the ruler of Japan. In 1603, the emperor appointed him shogun, establishing the Tokugawa shogunate that would govern Japan for 265 years. The weapons aboard Da Lifta, those 19 cannons and 500 muskets, were confiscated by Ieyasu's forces shortly after the ship arrived. Whether they were used at Sekigahara is debated by historians. The timing makes it plausible. But what is certain is that Adams himself had become a weapon of a different kind, a source of intelligence, a window into a world Ieyasu needed to understand if he was going to control trade with Europe on his own terms. In the show Shōgun, Ieyasu is called Yoshi Toranaga, and the political drama of the approaching battle dominates the narrative. The show makes Blackthorn, the Adams character, central to Toranaga's strategy. In reality, Adams was useful to Ieyasu, but Sekigahara would have happened with or without him. Ieyasu had been planning this for decades. Adams was a fortunate piece on a board that was already set. But Ieyasu was not finished with him. Adams asked to leave Japan. Ieyasu said no. He asked again. Ieyasu said no again. Adams petitioned repeatedly in the years between 1600 and 1605. The answer was always the same. Ieyasu found Adams too valuable to release. A navigator who could build European-style ships, who understood ocean trade routes, who could serve as an intermediary with the Dutch and English, was not someone Ieyasu intended to let go. So Adams stayed, and gradually, whether by design or by the slow accumulation of years, he became someone else. He learned Japanese, not the formal court language, but the practical Japanese of sailors, merchants, and household servants. He learned to navigate not just oceans, but the intricate social hierarchies of the society that had no category for a man like him. A foreigner who was neither merchant nor missionary, neither prisoner nor guest. Ieyasu resolved the ambiguity by creating a new category. Adams was granted the rank of Hatamoto, a direct vassal of the shogun. This was samurai status. For a foreign sailor from a working-class family in Kent, it was an almost incomprehensible elevation. He was given an estate on the Miura Peninsula, south of Ito, with a reported 80 to 90 households under his authority. He was given a Japanese name, Miura Anjin. Miura for the peninsula, Anjin meaning pilot. Adams wrote that Ieyasu treated him well, that the shogun gave him more than he had ever had in England, an estate, an income, respect. In Kent, he had been a skilled tradesman. In Japan, he was a lord. He was given, or found, a Japanese wife. Later popular accounts call her Oyuki, though this name is not confirmed in any historical document from the period. The details of how they came together are sparse. Whether it was arranged by Ieyasu or developed on its own, the record does not say clearly. What is recorded is that they had 2 children who bore English Christian names, a son named Joseph and a daughter named Susanna, a small act of preservation in a life that was becoming entirely Japanese. Around 1604, Adams built Japan's first Western-style ocean-going sailing vessel, an 80-ton ship constructed at Ito on the Izu Peninsula. He later built a larger one of about 120 tons. Ieyasu was reportedly pleased. The ships proved that Japan could build Western vessels without depending on Western nations. For Adams, they were something more personal. Building ships was what he had learned as a boy in Limehouse. It was the one skill that connected the man he had been to the man he was becoming. Adams also served as a trade broker. In 1609, with his help, the Dutch East India Company established a trading post at Hirado. The Dutch offered exactly what Adams had promised Ieyasu years earlier: trade without missionaries, commerce without conversion. This confirmed Adams' value and validated Ieyasu's instinct to keep him. Here is what the show Shōgun invented: a love story between Blackthorn and a Japanese noblewoman named Toda Mariko. In the show, Mariko is a complex, tragic figure who becomes Blackthorn's emotional anchor. The character is based loosely on Hosokawa Gracia, a real historical figure who was a devout Christian convert and the wife of a powerful daimyo. In reality, Hosokawa Gracia died in the summer of 1600. When Mitsunari's forces came to take her hostage, she refused to go. According to the most widely accepted account, she ordered a retainer to kill her rather than be captured. She died in her own residence during the same political crisis that preceded Sekigahara. There is no evidence that Adams and Hosokawa Gracia ever met, let alone had a romantic relationship. The real emotional story of William Adams is not a love affair with a noblewoman. It is something quieter, and in its own way, more devastating. It is the story of a man with two families on opposite sides of the world, and a silence that grew wider every year. In Gillingham, Kent, a woman named Mary Hinn Adams waited. Her husband had sailed from the Dutch coast in 1598. He had not come back. No word, no letter, no message from any returning ship. For years, nothing. We know almost nothing about Mary's life during this period. History did not consider the waiting wife of a missing navigator worth recording. She had children, including a daughter named Deliverance. She may have assumed William was dead. Most wives of lost sailors eventually did. Then, sometime around 1611 or 1613, a letter arrived. Possibly two. William Adams had written home. His surviving letters, which still exist and have been studied by historians, are written in rough, phonetic English. They are not literary documents. They are the words of a practical man trying to explain an impossible situation. He described where he was, Japan. He described what had happened, shipwreck. He described his position. He had a house, land, servants. He was, in material terms, better off than he had ever been in England. He asked that efforts be made to allow him to come home. He arranged for some of his wages and effects to be sent to Mary. What he did not describe, at least not in the letters that survive, was Oyuki, the Japanese wife, the two children, the life he had built in Miura. There is no record of Mary ever writing back. Whether she received the letters, whether she tried to respond, whether she had remarried or simply waited in silence, we do not know. The historical record offers nothing. Two letters, sent across the world into silence. It is tempting to fill this gap with imagination, to write scenes of Mary reading the letters or not reading them, to dramatize the pain of a woman who learned her husband was alive and living in a world she could not reach. James Cluvell did exactly this in his novel, inventing an elaborate emotional landscape around the separation. But the truth is that we do not know what Mary felt, what she did, or what she understood. We know only that the letters were sent and that no reply ever reached William Adams in Japan. What we can say is this. By 1611, Adams had been in Japan for 11 years. He had a Japanese wife. He had Japanese children. He had an estate, a title, a name that was not his birth name. He had become someone else. And the letters home read like messages from a man who already knew, even as he wrote them, that the person he was writing to lived in a world that no longer included him. The gap between the two lives was not just geographic, it was temporal. 15 years is long enough to become a different person, and William Adams, by 1613, was Miura Anjin. In 1613, the English East India Company sent its first trading mission to Japan. The ship was the Clove, commanded by Captain John Saris. Its purpose was to establish an English trading post, and it carried letters from the company directing Adams to assist in the effort. Adams did assist. He helped Saris navigate Japanese customs and politics. He helped establish the English trading house at Hirado. He was, as he had been for the Dutch, an invaluable intermediary. and Ceres offered him passage home. After 15 years. After the shipwreck, the imprisonment, the interrogations, the samurai title, the Japanese wife, the children, the ships he built, the trade he brokered. After all of it, a door opened. Adams declined. Why? He never explained his reasons in any surviving document. Historians have offered several interpretations. Some argue that by 1613, Adams' life was simply in Japan. His estate, his family, his standing. In England, he was a navigator from a modest background. In Japan, he was a hatamoto with land and title. The calculation may have been practical. Others suggest that Adams understood something harder to articulate. That the England he remembered no longer existed. That Mary, if she was still alive, had lived 15 years without him. That his children were no longer small but grown, people he would not recognize. That returning would mean leaving Oyuki and Joseph and Susanna, the family that was present, for a family that had become an abstraction. There may also have been tension with Ceres. Historical accounts suggest the two men did not get along. Ceres was reportedly critical of Adams for having gone too native, too Japanese. Adams, for his part, may not have been eager to place himself under the authority of a man he did not respect. But ultimately, we are guessing. The decision is recorded, the reasons are not. What we know is that William Adams, in 1613, had the chance to return to England and chose Japan. It is the choice that defines his life, not the shipwreck, not the samurai title, not the audience with Ieyasu. The moment when the trap became a decision. After the English trading post was established, Adams spent his remaining years making trading voyages to Southeast Asia, to Siam, to Cochin China. The travel restrictions that had once kept him in Japan were loosened, but Adams always returned. Japan was home now, not by force, by choice. The English trading post at Hirado, which Adams had helped create, was poorly managed and unprofitable. It closed in 1623, 3 years after Adams' death. The English had been given a foothold in Japan and squandered it. The Dutch, who Adams had also helped establish, stayed. They would be the only Europeans permitted in Japan for the next 2 centuries. William Adams died on May 16, 1620, at Hirado. He was 55 years old. The cause of his death is not recorded. He had spent his final years on trading voyages across Southeast Asia, and the rigors of those journeys, in an era before modern medicine, may have taken their toll. But we do not know. He was buried at Hirado. His grave still exists. His Japanese children, Joseph and Susanna, inherited portions of his estate. But the Japan that Adams had navigated so successfully was changing. Under Ieyasu's successors, the Tokugawa shogunate moved steadily toward isolation. Hidetada, and then Ieyasu, tightened restrictions on foreigners and Christians with increasing severity. In 1614, a nationwide ban on Christianity had already been issued. Missionaries were expelled. Japanese Christians were forced to renounce their faith or face execution. The practice of fumie was introduced. Suspected Christians were made to step on images of Christ or the Virgin Mary to prove they were not believers. Those who refused were tortured and killed. In 1637, the Shimabara Rebellion, a major uprising with significant Christian participation, was crushed. Approximately 37,000 people were killed. It was the final confirmation, in the eyes of the shogunate, that foreign religion was an existential threat. By 1639, the Portuguese were expelled entirely. By 1641, the Dutch were confined to Dejima, a tiny artificial island in Nagasaki harbor. No other Europeans were permitted. Japanese citizens were forbidden from leaving the country. Those who had gone abroad were forbidden from returning. This was Sakoku, the closed country. It would last for more than 200 years, until Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in 1853. Adams had died just 21 years before Sakoku was fully imposed. He was among the last generation of foreigners to live freely in Japan. to walk its roads, to own its land, to raise children who were both Japanese and something else. But there is a detail that is easy to miss, and it connects Adam's story to a legacy he could never have imagined. The Dutch were the only Europeans allowed to remain in Japan during Sakoku. The reason they were permitted was precisely the argument Adams had made to Ieyasu 2 decades earlier. The Dutch would trade without missionaries, commerce without conversion. Adams had planted that idea. The Dutch trading relationship he helped establish in 1609 survived everything that followed, and for 212 years, Dejima was Europe's only window into Japan. Adams was not aboard De Liefde alone. A Dutch sailor named Jan Joosten van Lodenstein had also survived the voyage and also became an advisor to Ieyasu. Jan Joosten was given a residence in Edo, and like Adams, received samurai status. He lived in the area near what is now Tokyo Station. Jan Joosten drowned around 1623 when his ship sank in the South China Sea during a trading voyage. But his name survived. The neighborhood where he lived became known as Yaesu, a Japanese pronunciation of Justin. Today, Yaesu is one of the busiest districts in Tokyo, the commercial area directly adjacent to Tokyo Station. Millions of people pass through it every day without knowing they are walking through a place named after a Dutch sailor from a rotting ship that arrived in 1600. 2 men from the same doomed voyage, one English, one Dutch. Both became samurai. Both gave their names to places in modern Japan. Ahanjin Sho, the old name for Adams' Iedo residence, and Yaesu, named for Justin. 400 years later, those names remain. There is a grave at Hirado, on the western coast of Japan, overlooking the sea. It belongs to William Adams. There is a memorial in Gillingham, Kent, a clock tower, a plaque. The town remembers its son who sailed away and never came back. In Ito, on the Izu Peninsula, there is a monument where Adams built his ships. Every year, the city holds the Anjin Festival in his memory. In Yokosuka, on the Miura Peninsula, there are markers where his estate once stood. In the old neighborhood of Nihonbashi in Tokyo, there was once a street called Anjin-cho, Pilot Street. A working-class navigator from Kent, apprenticed at 12, sailed against the Armada at 23, shipwrecked in Japan at 35. Made a samurai, given a Japanese name, a Japanese wife, Japanese children, a Japanese estate. Built ships for a shogun, helped open Japan to Dutch and English trade. Watched his usefulness fade as the country began to close. Died at 55, buried in foreign soil, 6,000 miles from the town where he was born. He never saw Mary again. He never saw his children in England grow up. He never explained in any document that survives why he chose to stay. James Cluvel gave him a different name, a love story, and a novel that sold millions of copies. FX gave him 18 Emmy Awards, but the real William Adams did not need a fictional romance or a dramatic reinvention. His actual life was stranger, sadder, and more remarkable than anything a writer could invent. A man who sailed to the edge of the known world, lost everything, built a new life from nothing, and when the door home finally opened, quietly closed it himself. That is the true story behind Shōgun.